Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. I would further like to inform you that views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, or the Urbana Socialist Forum, or, as we like to say on the TV version of this show, UPTV. These views are our own, and by our in this instance I mean pretty much just myself and or anyone whose article I happen to read on the show. Yeah, so there you have. I wonder why it's Urbana-Champaign community and not Champaign-Urbana community. I guess it's because we're in Urbana right now, technically speaking. But either way, it's the same thing, Urbana-Champaign, Champaign-Urbana. It's the same community, more or less. Same group of people. Anyway, yeah, it's warming up out there. It's actually, what, like 40 degrees or something crazy like that. The snow is melting. It's just generally turning into weather that I can stand as opposed to weather I can't stand. And I like that. Anyway, we weren't here last week. I don't remember why. I think there was probably a reason. I'm sure there was a reason, but whatever it was, it kept me away, and I apologize for not being here with you, but I'm here tonight. And hopefully as weather improves and health improves and such, we will get back on more regular footing. But you know how it is when you're trying to get around and do things and run radio shows and do all that stuff. It can be difficult. So anyway, as I said, welcome. Tonight, I would like to talk about the large numbers of people from Central America that are coming here. Because if you have, well, let me read this little piece for you from the Washington Post, and this sort of kind of captures the general tone of a lot of reporting on immigration these days. This is from the Washington Post, and I would read it if I could get it. It's called Immigration in Reverse, and it's by the Editorial Board. So it says, the anti-illegal immigrant rancor and outright nativism afoot in the Republican primary field give rise to the impression that illegal immigration has soared to unprecedented levels and that the border is no more than a line in the sand, scarcely monitored and easily crossed. The truth diverges wildly from that rhetoric, as a pair of recent studies demonstrate. Notwithstanding the demagoguery of Donald Trump and some of his GOP rivals, the number of illegal immigrants in this country, which has declined each year since 2008, is now at its lowest level since 2003. And the percentage of undocumented immigrants, likewise, is at its lowest point since the turn of the century. That's 2000. A report from the Pew Research Center shows a decline of nearly 1 million unauthorized immigrants to 11.3 million from 2007 to 2014. An even more recent survey from the Center for Migration Studies, a New York think tank, indicates that the number of illegal immigrants has now fallen to 10.9 million, a precipitous drop driven largely by declining arrivals from Mexico. In fact, according to Pew, for the first time since the 1940s, Mexican migrants have been leaving the United States at a greater rate than they have entered. Those numbers underscore what demographers have known for several years, that the great wave of Mexican immigration that began in the mid-1960s crested a few years ago and has been tailing off. Some 11.7 million Mexican-born immigrants, roughly half of them undocumented, are now in this country, down from 12.8 million in 2007. Most of those who have left have done so of their own accord. Comparatively few were deported. That Mr. Trump has leveraged fact-free rhetoric for political advantage is not news. Still, it is noteworthy that so much of the GOP primary oxygen, at least until the terrorist attacks in Paris, was consumed by alarmist rhetoric about border security, when in fact the border is more tightly patrolled than ever, and apprehensions at the southwestern border a rough measure of illegal crossings, have been cut by about 2/3 since September 11th, 2001. The dwindling Mexican immigration since the Great Recession reflects a number of factors, including on the pull side, bulky economic recovery and tougher border enforcement in the United States, and on the push side, improving economic conditions and a falling birth rate in Mexico. The result, according to Pew, is that in the 5 years ending in 2014, more than 1 million Mexicans, including 100,000 children born in the United States with dual citizenship, returned from the United States to live in Mexico, while 870,000 Mexicans entering the United States, many or most of them illegally. Republican rhetoric on immigration has not caught up to those numbers, nor to the reality that the U.S. economy, like other Western economies, cannot function without low-wage, low-skilled labor, which Mexico has supplied. An estimate 9 million plus undocumented immigrants, most of them Mexicans, are employed in this country. Mr. Trump's fantasies of mass deportation notwithstanding, they will not be replaced by native-born Americans. At some point, Republicans will need to grapple with that reality. So that's the kind of thing we've been seeing a lot of lately. And so the impression, because of this, that you get is that, immigration is just down across the board, and that, it's a problem insofar as it is a problem, or insofar as it has been a problem, it isn't really a problem anymore. Okay, that's fair enough, and it is true as far as it goes. But as we mentioned on the last show, there are a large number of Central American women and children coming, and that is still a problem because they are facing an entirely different situation, different reasons for leaving their home, different reasons for coming here, and a different kind of network and response from the government. So that moves us on to this next article from the Christian Science Monitor entitled Illegal Immigration's New Normal in America. The summer of 2014 saw huge numbers of Central American women and children cross the U.S. border. Now it's happening again, and the factors driving it haven't changed. Undocumented immigrant families are being detained at the United States border in numbers not seen since 2014, suggesting that the surge in illegal immigration that summer was not an aberration, but the establishment of a new normal. A dramatic rise in the number of unaccompanied children crossing the border in 2014 strained the country's ability to cope with them legally and humanely. Indeed, a new Associated Press report suggests that the surge taxed the system so severely that some children have been released into abusive homes or trafficked into slavery. By some measures, U.S. authorities are better prepared for the current influx, with the Department of Health and Human Services using churches and nonprofit groups to take in the rising inflow of migrant children, with plans to open more shelters by April. But the need appears to be, if anything, greater. Migrants from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, in particular, continue to head north to escape extreme poverty, escalating violence, and crumbling government institutions. In the last 3 months of 2015, when illegal border crossings typically drop, the Border Patrol detained 21,469 Central Americans traveling as a family. That's nearly the triple the 2014 numbers during the same period, according to the latest Border and Customs Protection data. Meanwhile, the number of children traveling alone more than doubled to 17,370. The new uptick comes after several months of decreasing border detentions, something analysts attribute primarily to a crackdown in Mexico that since 2014 has deported record numbers of Central Americans back to their home countries. But current migration patterns suggest that Central Americans and those who smuggle them across borders are gradually adjusting to Mexico's strengthened enforcement, finding alternate routes. Experts don't expect that to change anytime soon. And so the U.S. is looking to help Central American governments address root problems for the exodus. But it will take time to produce results, says Maureen Meyer, who directs Mexico's programs for the Washington office on Latin America. Quote, "It's clear we're going to see high numbers of Central Americans being apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border and in Mexico for the next few years," says Ms. Meyer. "The odds are that in the short term, the situation in Central America is not going to change." The sharp rise in families and unaccompanied children from Central America comes during a presidential campaign that has seen Republicans fight to establish who is toughest on illegal immigration. In January, the Obama administration launched a series of deportation raids mostly against women and children from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras who were ruled legally ineligible for legal U.S. status, an operation viewed largely as an attempt to quell the rising migrant flow. Border Patrol agents say a strong incentive luring migrants to the U.S. is the sense that many who have come since 2014 are still in the country, says Sean Moran, spokesman for the National Border Patrol Council, the union representing agents. Quote, "They come here in hopes of being caught because they know they'll be released into American society," Mr. Moran said of Central Americans. "That's what we're hearing from the people we're detaining." This is partly true. By law, the federal government must offer protection to unaccompanied minors who cross the border. They undergo medical screenings and mental health assessments. Most are turned over to family members already in the U.S. as their legal cases move forward. But the processing of families, mostly women and children, has evolved since 2014. When mothers and their children first began reaching the border in large numbers, many were released into the community. As the numbers soared, the government began to detain families longer and deport them faster, a strategy that has come under scrutiny in and out of court. Still, many families, particularly those who have expressed a fear of going home or a desire to apply for asylum, remain here, says Faye Hipsman, Associate Policy Analyst with the Migration Policy Institute in Washington. The immigration court backlogs are so long that not a lot of these cases have been resolved yet. Knowing that a relative, friend, or neighbor has been allowed to stay in the U.S. may strengthen migrants' resolve to cross the border, Ms. Hipman adds. The most recent U.S. budget aims to address the root causes for Central American immigration by tilting regional aid more toward economic development and away from security issues. The $750 billion in aid also establishes a series of strong conditions on what Central American governments have to demonstrate before funds are released to them, notes Adriana Beltran in an analysis for the budget for the Washington office on Latin America. Maria Pascual Juan says she was well aware when she decided to leave Guatemala and sneak across the U.S.-Mexico border that she risked being deported, but she chose to make a long, clandestine journey north anyway to try to improve her lot in life. "There is nothing for poor people in Guatemala," she said in an interview earlier this month. "No work, no help, nothing." The 30-year-old woman and her 11-year-old daughter, Ana, managed to evade immigration authorities in Mexico and later slip under the U.S.-Mexican border fence into Arizona. Border agents soon picked them up and, after a short time of detention, released them at a Tucson shelter run by a religious organization. The possibility of living and working in this country, even on a short-term basis, was enough to pull Miss Pascual Juan north. Employment in Guatemala has been scarce since a fungus ravaged the coffee crops that her family relied on for a living. "There is no other work," she adds. She and her husband, Julio Mateo, planned separate trips to the U.S. a month apart, which gave them time to borrow enough money to cover smugglers' fees for themselves and their 2 daughters. Each traveled with a child, she with their oldest and he with their toddler, Eulogia. Border agents detained father and daughter in the Texas Rio Grande Valley, where most border crossers from countries other than Mexico are still coming, even as they disperse to other parts of Texas, Arizona, and California. Pascual Juan and her daughter landed in Arizona, and after a night, agents dropped off the pair at a shelter owned by Catholic Community Services. Volunteers there help house and feed the families before helping them make travel arrangements so they can join relatives living in other states. After a couple days at the Tucson shelter, Pascal Juan and her daughter boarded a bus to Nebraska, where the whole family reunited. Though relieved to have everyone together again, Pascal Juan worries that neither she nor her husband will be allowed to work here even temporarily. The U.S. government monitors her husband's movements through an ankle bracelet, a Department of Homeland Security alternative to the detention of women and children. The family now awaits hearings before an immigration judge. I hope we are allowed to stay here so we can work for a while, the mother says. That's what we want more than anything. That's why we came here, to work. So you see from those two articles a very different picture on immigration. Very, very different. And it shows something about what's going on here, and why we cannot look at immigrants as just use that label and just toss it on everybody that comes here from another country. That may be a general term that you can use to describe people who come from one country to move to another one to live and work and whatever, but it is a very inexact way of describing the people that are coming here and the types of the reasons why they come here and what's going on. I would say that the immigrants, that the people, the persons coming here from Central America are refugees. And I think for a while, and even now, some of the people coming here from Mexico are also refugees. And they're different from the people who are just coming here looking for work. Now, that article placed a lot of emphasis on the fact that this particular person that they talked to just wanted to work. So it sounds like the way they're making it sound, or at least the inclusion of just this one story out of all the many stories of the people that could be told, gives you the sense that at the heart of everything, all that anybody who comes here is looking for is work. But I think that is misleading. It may or may not have been intentional. I don't know. The fact that they concentrated so hard and they didn't even bother to get another story from someone else makes me think it was intentional. But whether or no, the effect of it was to give you the sense that, at the bottom of everything, everybody who comes here is just looking to work and possibly improve their status in life. And that is certainly not the case. There is a lot of violence and gang violence and problems in all these countries, Mexico, all the Central American countries, even some places in South America, that drive people away, drive them north, and send them here. And the unaccompanied minors, the children that are coming here by themselves, I'm sure that working is, somewhere in there in the mix of their idea of why they're coming here. But when you're a kid and you undertake a journey like that, it's not just because you're looking for a job or you're looking for what you hope will be a better job than the one you have currently. There are people that came, and I think the outflow of immigrants from Mexico over the last couple of years really demonstrates that there were a lot of people that came up because times were hard. They were looking for work. They were looking for employment. They didn't necessarily want to stay here. They were just like, well, I'm going to go there and make some money for a while. Things improve at home. They're like, oh, I'm going to go back home. Those were immigrants. Those were economic migrants, however you want to put it. And that was their reasoning. And they came. They did what they came here to do, or hopefully they did, and then they went home. The people that are still coming, particularly from Central America, I would argue are primarily refugees and need to be treated that way. And it's a completely different situation. Listen to this, for example. This is from, what is this from? KOAT News. Who's KOAT News? Okay, Albuquerque. Okay. Nearly 700 immigrant children arrive at Holloman Air Force Base. 700 children. Around 700 immigrant children from Central America arrived at Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo Sunday. Holloman will serve as one of 3 temporary immigrant housing shelters in the U.S. The other 2 are in Colorado and Florida. The children are being housed in a vacant building on the base that was formerly used by the 4th Space Surveillance Squadron. Space Surveillance Squadron? What are they surveilling in space? Are they looking down on the Earth? Anyway, each child is in the care of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The children are between the ages of 14 and 17 and are from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Most of them will likely not stay on the base longer than 1 month, according to officials. The children will receive schooling and medical care from base personnel during their stay until they hear if they will be deported or allowed to stay in the U.S. According to our partners at the Albuquerque Journal, the federal government is trying to avoid a repeat of the summer of 2014 when so many children crossed the border into the U.S. from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Those children were forced to stay in U.S. Border Patrol facilities, which aren't designed to house children. That situation also kept officers from securing the border. Many in Alamogordo said they support the cause to keep the children at the base. Quote, "We have to be humanitarians at all times when it comes to children like this," Ellie Cowles, who helps put on a local gun show, said. But Cowles added that many in the town are opposed to the idea of keeping kids at the base. Quote, "I think a lot of folks are just curious as to how long they'll be there and how much money is being spent keeping them there." Many shelters will likely normally ask for donations for the children, though Holloman Air Force Base officials didn't return calls when Action 7 News inquired if they were seeking or in need of donations. So, 700 kids. I mean, if you kind of like imagine the number of 700 children, that's a lot of kids, and that's just at one facility. And so, okay, so people were complaining about that, and like, oh, we shouldn't, we can't afford it. I mean, that seems to be the problem. So think about this. Here's another subject. Here's another topic about immigrants that you might want to look at in terms of thinking like, well, should we care for these refugees that are coming here? Why don't we just send them all back? Why do we have to deal with this sort of thing? Okay, here's from the Editorial Board of USA Today. Repeal the Cuban Adjustment Act. Okay. President Obama is feeling heat from Latinos and pro-immigration groups over deportation raids directed at recently arrived undocumented immigrants, mostly from Central America. He's in a difficult position. He wants to prevent a recurrence of 2014 when more than 51,000 children from Guatemala, Honduras, and other nations arrived at the U.S. border. To that end, the deportation raids send a clear message aimed at discouraging more people from coming. But the spectacle of raids involving children and families is a wrenching one. What Obama is not feeling much heat over is the more than 47,000 undocumented Cubans who came to the USA last year, or the equal or larger numbers likely to come this year, 47,000 Cubans. That's because U.S. laws treat Cubans differently from immigrants of any other nationality, thanks to the Cuban Adjustment Act, first enacted in 1966 and amended in 1996. Any Cuban who makes it to U.S. soil is put on a fast track to permanent legal status, benefits, and ultimately citizenship. Let me read that again. Any Cuban who makes it to U.S. soil is put on a fast track to permanent legal status, benefits, and ultimately citizenship. The law, which never made much sense, should be repealed. While the Castro brothers in Cuba have been brutal and repressive, the same can be said of many other regimes around the world. One of the worst places these days is Syria, where citizens are caught between the despotic regime of Bashar Assad and the bloodthirsty militants of the so-called Islamic State. Excuse me. Yet many American lawmakers, including those who support the Cuban Adjustment Act, are dead set against anything more than token acceptance of Syrian refugees. To call U.S. policy toward Cubans bizarre is an understatement. Cubans have a special status, presumably because they are fleeing from persecution. Yet, under the Act, Cubans, unlike asylum seekers from other countries, can, and often do, make trips back and forth to their homeland without jeopardizing their applications for permanent status. Surely those who faced a serious threat of persecution wouldn't want to return to Cuba. Cubans have also found a way to game the wet foot, dry foot policy that grew out of the Cuban Adjustment Act in the 1990s. This policy holds that anyone apprehended at sea will be sent back to Cuba, while those who reach U.S. shores are home free. Rather than risk being caught at sea, the vast majority of Cubans these days fly to Mexico and travel overland to the U.S. border. U.S. immigration policies on Cuba also provide reasons for cynicism in politics. Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, the two Cuban-American Republican senators running for president, both portray themselves as tough on illegal immigration and border enforcement, but neither can bring himself to advocate repealing the Cuban Adjustment Act. Rubio says it should be re-examined, but his focus is on making adjustments that would end the back-and-forth travel while leaving its central tenets intact. Cruz argues the law is still necessary, given the continued existence of a communist regime in Havana. The United States needs laws that will deter illegal immigration, not encourage it. Enforcing these laws would be easier if they were at least consistent, fair, and defensible. The Cuban Adjustment Act is none of the above. This is from USA Today's Editorial Board. And that points out something that I was thinking of saying about this, or the comparison that I was wanting to draw. So the number here, let's see, what is it? Last year, 47,000 undocumented Cubans came to the USA. 47,000. And they were just welcome. They rolled out a red carpet and said, here, come on in. We'll set you up. Fast track to permanent legal status, benefits, and ultimately citizenship. You don't hear a lot of people arguing against this because they either don't know about it or who knows. Now, in 2014, there were 51,000 children from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador who arrived at the U.S. border. So that's 4,000 more, granted. But it's not, in the vast scheme of things, the entire United States, that's not a huge difference. That's a statistically marginal difference. So for the benefit of this discussion, that's virtually the same number of people in 2014 arrived from these countries as arrived from Cuba last year. But the difference in how they're being treated is dramatic. It's just not even, there's almost no comparison. It's just night and day between the two. And yet, we're just operating under the assumption that these people from Cuba are coming here because there's a repressive regime, or that they're, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt, and yet these other people who are demonstrating through their desperation and the lengths that they go to travel here from their countries, that they are indeed in dire straits,